Anything that's comfortable for you.
Yeah, I'd like to. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
Fine.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for that lengthy
Could
summary
have been
of my
much longer,
activities.
but I wanted you to speak.
Well, you left out something.
I knew I'd leave out
Yeah,
something.
In 1996, when I was president of the Convention and Visitors Bureau, Mayor Carollo, well, actually, let me begin. I started my career in 1959, July 15th, in the city of Miami. And I spent 8.5 years working up to be assistant city manager. And then my first job was Clearwater. I spent 6 years as city manager of Clearwater. I moved 2 blocks to the courthouse, and I was county administrator of Pinellas County for about 3.5 years. And then Steve Clark recruited me to come down and be the county manager in 1976. But in 1996, Joe Carollo was the mayor, and I had to go see the mayor about some tourism business. I was running the convention bureau, and Cesar Odio was the city manager, and he was going off to jail for some indiscretions, and Carollo wanted me to be city manager of the city of Miami. I said no, I would not do that. I had my whole career mapped out in the convention and visitor industry. Was in the chair as a secretary of the International. There are 500 convention and visitor bureaus across the world in most of the major cities, and I was destined to be the international president. So then I was thinking about retiring after that. And then he asked me, well, would I come back as interim city manager while they did a search? I said, well, that's interesting. Of course, I had a board of directors that were all businessmen and women, and from the private sector. And they didn't want their president and CEO going back into the public service. There's a term in the industry called butts in beds, and that's where their focus is, having people come here, and going on the cruises or in the airlines and the restaurants and whatever, and that's the business of promoting conventions and tourists and business travel. So the long and short of it is I accepted that assignment with the permission of my board, provided I committed in blood oath that I would not stay, and they continued to pay my salary, so I went over pro bono at no expense to the city. And the mayor asked me to look over the budget. They passed it on first reading. This was, I should have known something because it was on September the 13th, Friday, that I got sworn in. And he said, Merrett, I want you to take the budget home. It's been passed on first reading, and it's coming up in 11 days for second reading and final reading. And I said I would. And I went home. Saturday, I had a whole parade of department directors coming in. But that night, I curled up with the budget and the last audited statements and the financial reports and so forth and so on. And by 11:30 that night, I knew there was something bogus. And if you remember the city of Miami facing bankruptcy, that was the product of my being there, because, and I won't go into detail, I could write a book, it'll be a chapter in my book, how for the next 2 months I spent 15, 16-hour days, 7 days a week, coming up with a recovery plan, because the city faced bankruptcy. It would not have been able to make payroll by March or April of the next year. And at the end of our research, there was a $68 million shortfall on a $275 million budget. So they really were facing a very critical financial problem. And I don't know how that got left out of there, but that you got everything else.
I didn't want to write a book.
You got everything else but the kitchen sink, and did a very thorough job, I might say. I would prefer to just try to answer questions. So actually, I've been in this business. Right now, I'm president and CEO acting. of the Zoological Society of Florida, past chairman, and we're recruiting a new CEO. And we're about wrapping that up. I've been doing this for the last 4 months, and I want to go back to being semi-retired and doing my other things. I have a lot of views on issues facing this community, the state, that you may disagree with, which is certainly your right. And like talk about single-member districts, which essentially have disenfranchised the voters of this county, where you elect 1 out of 13, maybe. So if you had a zoning case, what happened to my wife?
She took the parking permit.
Oh, she's down. That was it. She had to get a parking permit and then go downstairs and put it on the car so we don't get a ticket. Yeah, all right, I got it. I should be back in a little bit. Anyway, single-member districts versus at-large. And I happen to think that there should be a combination of at-large, which I say that if you elect somebody at-large, they're going to represent all the people. They'll represent people in South Miami, they'll represent the inner city, they'll represent minorities, they'll represent no matter where you live.
Like
they
an
will
independent.
represent, and they'll have a global perspective as opposed to a parochial or provincial, like this is my district and anything that goes on in there, I'll take care of that. And if you went down on a zoning case, you look at the dais, and there's only 1 out of the 13 up there that you voted for. Maybe you voted for, maybe you didn't. And that's what I mean by disenfranchisement. That's one issue. I'm very concerned about the state of Florida. I know these are difficult times and the wolf is at the door, and I'm very privy to it. One of the things I do is mediation, foreclosure mediation. I'm a certified circuit court mediator. And so I'm very knowledgeable about the hardships that people are having in losing their homes and condos and what have you, and all the pain and trauma that is associated with that. On the other hand, the financial structure of the state is archaic, and the only way it'll ever be changed, if it can be, because now it takes 60% plus 1 of the voters to change the financial structure. We are dependent on the sales tax. It is a regressive tax. It hurts the poor. We should have a state income tax. You may think I'm crazy, but we should have a state income tax. We should have a diversified financial structure. The infrastructure of the state is declining. Our ability to maintain it and be a Class A state is almost impossible, given the composition of the legislature and the challenges that we face. The legislature has constantly passed the buck back to cities, counties, and the school boards. Our education system is struggling. I can speak about that if you want. What else do I feel strongly about? Well, that's for openers. I don't know. So why don't I, rather than just making a speech,